Hey, welcome to this week's Beyond Sunday podcast, Conversations from the Green Room. Glad you could join us this week again. This week is a little bit fun and special for me because I did not preach this past Sunday. I got to sit in the congregation and listen to our pastor of discipleship and assimilation preach from our next passage in the Gospel of John, John chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. And I enjoyed that because I got to sit and listen and be fed myself. And it also allowed me to think in terms kind of in advance for this podcast this week, because as I was hearing it preached and was reading through the text myself as a congregant, it allowed me to focus on three things in particular that I thought would be fun for us to dive into that Gabe did not touch on very much. And they were three things that kind of, I think, impact me from that section of Scripture. So I wanted to take the opportunity this week to do that. So, like I said, three things that as I read that text stick out to me that I think are important or at least worthy to dig into a little bit more. The first one, and of course, if you go back, John chapter 6, for those of you that maybe didn't see the sermon or listen to the sermon, is John chapter 6 where Jesus is feeding the 5,000 men, it says. And by the way, just to make the point that it's 5,000 men in particular in the text that is named, which is not to say that there were only men in the crowd. It's just that they counted the men, and then the men had with them their families likely. And so we have a situation where you had 5,000 men plus women and children, so it numbered probably well in excess of 10,000 plus. That was the crowd. So you're talking a very, very large crowd. And so Jesus feeds them because they're hungry, and he multiplies famously 5 loaves and 2 fish that a boy has with him for his lunch for the day, his meals, his food for the day. And so I wanted to dive in deeper to that by asking an initial question. The people are hungry. Jesus wants to feed them. Jesus uses a boy's lunch to multiply and feed the people. Why does Jesus use this child's lunch? Jesus could have fed the crowd a million different ways, right? He could have solved the problem by having manna descend from heaven. He could have just had bread fall from the sky. That's not crazy. That's literally what he does in Exodus to feed the people of Israel, is he creates bread from the sky and it appears on the ground. He could have done that again. He did it then, back in Exodus. He could do it now. But he doesn't do that. He could have. You remember the encounter that Jesus has with Satan in the wilderness? You remember Satan tempts him with Jesus' own hunger by telling Jesus to do what? Turn the stones into bread. Jesus could have done that. He could have done it there in the wilderness with Satan. He could have done it here on the side of the mountain with the people that came to see him. He could have just turned the rocks into bread. What's another thing Jesus could have done? Remember that time Jesus talks about the pulling money out of the fish's mouth, right? He could have literally created the money and then told them, hey, here's the money to go buy food for everybody. He could have done it that way. Jesus is God. He could have just satisfied everybody so that they didn't need to eat. He could have just made them all not hungry. There's a million, we could go on and on and on. There's a million different things that Jesus could have done to solve the problem of the people gathered that were hungry, but he didn't do any of that. Instead, he took a boy's lunch, and he took that boy's lunch and multiplied it and fed all the people with it. Why? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons that he does that are important. The first thing I think Jesus is teaching us is that you don't have to be anybody special to be used by him. He uses a boy. This boy would have not been significant. This boy would have been overlooked. This would have been the kind of person that when the disciples were trying to figure out, Jesus, how are we going to solve this problem? They would have not thought, oh, That's the solution to our problem. That kid right there. They would have totally overlooked him and maybe even thought of him as a problem, as something to, oh, we need to get him to scatter away. We need to get him to go away because that's just another mouth to feed, and we need to feed the important people. They would have disregarded him completely, if not just simply overlooked him. But Jesus doesn't see him as a problem or a nuisance or somebody to get rid of. Jesus sees him as somebody who can actually solve the problem. And he takes this boy's lunch and what he has, this person of insignificance, and he takes him and uses his generosity, his gift of this food that he gives up and offers up, and he uses it to feed people. So it doesn't matter who you are. That's the first important lesson here. That it doesn't matter who you are. God can use you. You don't have to be a person of significance. You don't have to be a person of wealth. You don't have to be a person of wisdom. You can just be available with whatever you have, and God can take it and use it. So that's the first reason why I think God uses this boy's food. I think there's another lesson in here for us of why Jesus solves the problem this way. And that is to stress upon us that he wants us to be involved in what he is doing. Yes, he could have called down manna from heaven. Yes, he could have just satisfied everyone by making them not hungry. Yes, he could have pulled money out of a fish's mouth. Yes, he could have done all these other things that we talked about. But he didn't. He wanted that boy to be involved in the miracle. He wants you to be involved in what he's doing. He doesn't want you to have the attitude that you're just watching him do whatever it is he's doing. He is engaging us to be on mission. This is the significance of the Great Commission. Matthew 28, he commissions his followers to do the mission. Jesus could appear himself to people, and he himself could preach the gospel. Remember, he did it to Paul. Paul, when he was commonly going by the name of Saul, was on the road, and what happens? Jesus shows up and preaches the gospel to him in person. So Jesus could do that to everybody. He could just be the only evangelist that exists in the world. But that's not his plan. He could do that, but he doesn't. He wants us to preach the gospel. He wants you to preach the gospel. So if you're worried about a coworker or a neighbor or a family member who need to hear about Jesus, could Jesus just show up and share the gospel with them? Yeah, absolutely could. Could he send an angel to proclaim the gospel? Absolutely. Gabriel could go and proclaim the gospel just like Gabriel went and told Mary she was pregnant and going to bear Jesus. He doesn't need you, but he wants you. He wants you to be engaged. He wants you to be part of the mission. He wants to use you to accomplish his purposes, just like he wanted to use this boy and his food to feed the crowd. He didn't need the boy. He didn't need the boy's lunch. He wanted the boy, and he wanted the boy's lunch because he wanted him to be part of the story that he's telling of how he meets needs. And he wants to use you in exactly the same way. So that's the first reason of significance, I think, in the story that we can mine into is this idea of the boy and his lunch and how God uses it. Second question I have as I read the text that I'm struck by is, why are there 12 baskets of leftovers? Right? Probably to me, the most famous part of the story, the best part of the story, is that you have at the end of the miracle more food left over than you started with. You start with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and you end after everyone has eaten with more than what you started with. That, by the way, proves it's a miracle. It wasn't just people didn't eat and were satisfied when the food was passed around. No, it actually literally multiplied because they had more at the end than at the beginning. And so that's significant. But it's not just that there's more at the end than the beginning, although that's significant. That tells us that God supplies more than we need. But the question I have is, why 12 basketfuls? Now here, We get to have fun on this Beyond Sunday podcast. I get to say things that I probably wouldn't say in the pulpit otherwise. This is one of those things, because the reason I wouldn't say this in the pulpit is not because I don't believe it, but I admit there's a little bit of speculation here. Why is it that there are 12 baskets? People could fire off reasons. I've heard most commentators, when you look at commentaries, will say something about the significance of the number 12, the 12 tribes of Israel, or the number of completeness, or all kinds of different things that people say the significance of the number 12. You know what I think it was? I think it comes down to this very simple reason. I'm supposing. Here's my supposition. I think there were 12 basketfuls left over because there were 12 disciples. What do I mean by that? There were 12 disciples that were freaking out over how they were going to feed all the people because they didn't have any food. And they were trying to figure out, Jesus, how are we going to feed all these people? How are they going to stick around? How are we going to keep the crowd? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? We don't have enough food. And here's what I know as a pastor. Oftentimes when there's a meal, here's what's happened to me often. By the way, at AlomaChurch, we have an amazing food ministry. They cook the best food. I mean, it's incredible. It's so good. And every Wednesday night, we're going to start back Wednesday night meals here soon. And Wednesday night meals are so good, and they cook such great meals. And I remember, sometimes the cook team is worried that they're going to have enough food. I don't think we're going to have enough food. I don't know. It's a big crowd tonight. I don't know if we're going to have enough food. I don't know if we're prepared enough for this crowd. And you know what often happens? Not only do we have enough food, but there's leftovers. God bless us. We always are able to feed people. Here's what I also know. Oftentimes at the end of the night, sometimes there's so much leftovers that they're trying to give it away. They're trying to get rid of it so it doesn't go bad. And you know who often takes home the leftovers? I get the benefit of that sometimes, where I get to take home some leftovers for the next day because there's just a little bit left over and they don't want to throw it away. So, hey, preacher, why don't you take something? Here's my point. I'm rambling. Jesus preaches. The people are hungry. The disciples are worried. We don't have enough food. He takes the food from the kid. He multiplies it. They pass it out. At the end, everybody's full. There's 12 basketfuls left over. And much like the preacher at the end of a Wednesday night, when the cook team is worried that they aren't going to have enough food and they send the preacher home with the leftovers, you know what that leftover is that I am reminded of when I go home at a Wednesday night, especially when the cook team was worried that we weren't going to have enough food? Those leftovers are a tangible reminder that God provides. I'm looking at the evidence that God provided and everybody was fed at church tonight. Those same disciples, those 12 disciples who were worried that they didn't have enough food, how are they going to feed all these people? The reason there were 12 basketfuls left over, I think, is because Jesus sent home those 12 disciples, each with a basket that they had to carry down off that mountain. And as they walked up that mountain empty-handed, worried about how they were going to feed people, they walked down off that mountain, each carrying a basket full of food as a tangible reminder that Jesus is making a point to each and every single one of those 12 disciples. Do not doubt me. And they left with the tangible reminder of that. Just as I on a Wednesday night often leave with a tangible reminder that God always provides. Those disciples remembered God always provides. So that's why I think there were 12 baskets left over. I don't think it was random. I think Jesus is doing something very specific for his disciples as a reminder. Third thing that I think is cool about the passage that is often overlooked and not often mentioned is at the very end. At the very end of the passage in John chapter 6, verse 21, as they move off the mountain and have fed the people, the disciples get into a boat and they cross the sea, and there's a rough ride, and it says that Jesus comes out onto the water, and they see him in the storm, and they invite him into the boat, and Jesus gets into the boat, and immediately it says they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Here's the question I have. Did we just see the beginnings of what becomes known as Star Trek teleportation? What's interesting about this passage is we're told how far they row out into the water. And apparently, given by what we get in the text, it's approximately halfway. When they see Jesus walking out onto the water, given the distance that we're told in the passage, he is rough. They are roughly halfway in the middle of the sea. They are not near land. And when it says when Jesus gets into the boat, John says immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Commentators will debate what this is and what's going on. I think it's just a miracle of, I say the joke earlier about Star Trek teleportation, beam me up, Scotty. But I think that's what we have here is we have a miraculous moving of the boat from the middle of the sea to the place where they were going instantaneously when Jesus gets in the boat. The question is why? Why does this happen? I think the reason why this happens is to tell us something very significant about what it is to put our trust in Jesus. Think about it. The text says that they were struggling all night long into the middle of the night. They could not cross the sea. They were stuck in the middle of it. The storm was raging around them. They could not get across. The moment Jesus steps into the boat, they're on the other side. Here's what I want to focus on. I want to focus on the fact that what I think is significant is if you are trying to fight life's storms without Jesus, you will expend so much energy getting nowhere. But if you will just invite Jesus in and you allow him into your life, it doesn't remove your problems. It doesn't always take away the storms. But what it does guarantee is that you will arrive at your destination, because your destination point is not the other side of the storm. Your destination point is Jesus. When you are with him, you are at your destination. It doesn't matter what your destination you think is. Your destination point is ultimately Jesus. Let me put it to you this way. Your ultimate destination point is heaven. And the question I have for you as a Christian is, what makes heaven heaven? What makes heaven wonderful? It is not streets of gold. It is not your family and your loved ones. What makes heaven heaven is Jesus. And when you are with him, you are at the greatest destination you could ever be at. Here's the hope that I hope you grab onto today. Whether the storm stops or not, whether you're in the middle of the sea and it's raging around you or not, whether you're dealing with cancer, whether you're dealing with bankruptcy, whether you're dealing with job loss, whether you're dealing with broken relationships, whatever the storm is that you're dealing with, and you're focused on, I want to get to the other side of this storm, I want to get over there, I want to get through this, I want to get past this, whatever it is, you can struggle and struggle all you want to, and you're gonna do nothing but struggle. But when you have Jesus, you are at your destination point, whatever the storm is, whatever the struggle is. So hold on to Jesus. He is your destination. God bless you. Hope you are having a great week, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next week here on Beyond Sunday. God bless.